So your child refuses to speak the language you want him to speak. Stick around. I'll tell you why I think this happens, what to do to avoid it, and how to potentially reverse it if you're already knee-deep in trouble. Welcome to AskTetsu. I've been raised in multiple languages, and today I am raising my 4 kids in 5 languages. Subscribe if you want to know how I'm doing it, so that you can also unlock the world's opportunities for your children. Let's do this! So in my treacherous journey to raise my kids in 5 languages, there's something that I am extremely careful about and that I want to avoid at all costs. Now, this is to find myself in the situation where my kids start to refuse to speak the languages that we are raising them in. Indeed, it is a very common issue, but I refuse to accept it as an unavoidable problem, and I want to do whatever I can to circumvent it. And thankfully, so far with our kids, my oldest is now 8, so far so good. We have not seen any signs of refusal to speak any of the 5 languages that we're teaching them. And the same goes for my second, third children. Now my 4th is just 8 months old, so that's not started yet. And the objective of our whole language program that we call everything that we're doing to raise our kids in 5 languages is to get them to go through this at least to the age of 10, and if possible, up to the age of 12. So for our first child, he's already 8, so we're pretty close to our base case objective of 10 years old. So again, I've really seen and heard so many cases, and I've had parents ask me at my presentations, or we see on those online forums and Facebook groups that we have parents who are going through this trouble of having their kids refuse to speak the languages that they're trying to teach them. My own Taiwanese relatives in California, they also have the situation where the parents and grandparents have to speak to the kids in Mandarin, but the kids always respond in English. And I also remember when I was growing up in Taiwan, I went to an American school, so I was educated in English, but all my friends were Taiwanese. They either speak Mandarin or Taiwanese. And I remember really hating it when they would come to me and say, "Oh, how do you say this in English?" or "How do you say that in English?" And they also knew my mother was Japanese, so they would ask me how to say this or that in Japanese. And it really bugged me. I wasn't mature enough to think that language is very important and it's really cool to speak different languages. I just sort of did not like people taking me kind of like a circus show. And then when I came to Canada, I sort of had the opposite problem where everything's in English or French, and now I've got all these friends who wanted me to say this or that in Chinese or again in Japanese also. And I also really hated when they try to imitate the sounds I was saying. And I mean, kids can be pretty cool, and I'm sure not many of them didn't have really bad intentions, but it did just feel like that they were always mocking you. Fortunately, things did not get out of hand bad enough to make me completely want to stop speaking these languages, but I remember it did hurt. Taking my own experience and that of all the other accounts that I hear about all the time, I think I would resume the reasons this happens into 2 categories. The reasons, that is, of the kids wanting to refuse to speak a certain language. The first level, I think, is really pragmatic. So if the kids don't feel a need to speak a certain language, or they find that a language is difficult, that they're not very proficient in, then they get lazy about it. Especially if you have a choice. If you have a choice to speak English and Japanese is really hard, then why not speak English? And on the second level, I would say, is more the emotional side. So if they don't associate pride with a language, or worse, if they associate shame to a language. For example, what I was talking about earlier, if kids tease you about your language, your heritage language, then that could cause them to want to refuse to speak that language. So what do we do in our family in order to avoid getting ourselves into a situation where the kids start to refuse to speak the different languages that we're teaching them? Well, first thing that we do is we create compelling needs to speak the language. Specifically, we use a very popular strategy called OPAL, that stands for one person, one language. And in this situation, myself and my father, we use Mandarin with the children. My mother and my wife both are Japanese. They speak Japanese with the kids. Living in Quebec, they go to school in French. And in Canada, we have lots of inputs in English, whether it's TV or friends or coaches. They have lots of different inputs in English. And we also bring in what is called au pairs, so that's live-in nannies to be in the house with us, except this year due to COVID. But usually we would have a caregiver who lives with us, and we bring her in from Mexico. So she would use Spanish with the kids exclusively. That's 5 languages that the kids need to use in order to communicate with each person. And to reinforce our heritage language, that's Japanese and Mandarin, every year we go back to Japan and go to Taiwan for 2 months each. So this not only builds a strong habit to use the language consistently every day, and it also builds pride. So if you go back to Japan, everybody speaking Japanese allows us to use it, make friends, and it also builds a sense of belonging and pride, I think. Same goes with the Mandarin when we go back to Taiwan. So the second strategy we do to prevent our kids from refusing to speak certain languages is we don't switch around. Even if we speak a few languages, we don't switch around. Each person would stick with one language with the kids. What's important here is that we don't give them a choice. Like I mentioned earlier, if they have a choice, they'll choose what's easier. So we don't give them a choice. We make them develop a very strong habit of speaking one specific language with one specific person. Then that gets solidified and it becomes actually weird to speak another language with that person. And that's exactly what we're looking for. I go into a lot more detail in this video about this strategy to stick to one language when raising multilingual children. So next point, if we see that in the various things that we're doing with our kids, whether it's games, books, online lessons, etc., if we see that boredom is starting to set in and we switch it up, we change the content, we change the place, the time, the teacher, etc. Try to make it fun. That's really the key point. We need to keep it fun and interesting for the kids. And for sure what we have to do is be patient and, importantly, not force anything. We cannot force them to like a language. We cannot force them to do something that they don't like. I mean, nobody likes that. So you can find out more about a typical day, the things that we do in a typical day in this video right up here. So next let's go into a little bit more about the emotional side. So we're always very conscious and we're sensitive when we're outside in front of other people or their friends, peers. Although I've not seen this happen very often, if at all. But if I were to see the kids uncomfortable with us speaking Mandarin or Japanese with the kids in front of their Quebecer friends, then I would definitely stay low key, not attract too much attention, not speak too loudly, or bring them to a different spot to talk to them. It's just a matter of being sensitive to their feelings and not make them lose face. Another thing that we are very sensitive to in terms of emotional distress is looking for signs of bullying. Again, we've not seen any signs of that yet, but we make sure to talk to their teachers. We always ask them, we ask them more about social integration than grades and academic performance. We always ask the teachers whether they are making a lot of friends, whether they're having fun at school, and we always ask them also whether there's signs of them being bullied, or vice versa. I mean, can't imagine it happening, but just want to make sure that they are socially well integrated. And this holds true for the school here in Quebec, the school we put them in when we go to Japan, and the summer school in Taiwan. Now, thankfully, thus far, the teachers have always told us that our kids are very adaptive. They make friends very easily, and they talk a lot, and these are all good signs. Last but not least, I think you need to build very, very strong parent-children relationships. I think this goes beyond the language skills. It's sort of good parenting basics. You need to take a lot of time, you spend a lot of time with your kids, creating a strong bond, trust. For your children to speak a language that they don't feel very comfortable in requires a lot of trust. I mean, you'd be the same. You wouldn't want to be risking losing face speaking a weaker language in front of somebody you don't trust. So the above are all ideas and ways to prevent your children from refusing to speak the language that you want them to speak in. But what if it's already started? What if your children already don't want to speak the language that you want to teach them? It's very hard to reverse. So I think it's important that you first realize that you're now in a very, very difficult situation. So you have to already accept that you need to take a lot of time and effort to gradually reverse the whole situation. So you don't want to force anything. Forcing them to speak it will definitely not help. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this is about trust and relationship more than language skills. So that's where I would put my focus if I were in that situation. So with that trust and the relationship, I would slowly build in more dialogues and discussions on the importance of these languages that you want them to learn and acquire. The importance for them, their future, but also for you, what your expectations are. But all this comes after you now have a trusting relationship. And all the while, I would continue with different things that you've been doing, whether it's reading books with them or exercises, games, all the efforts that you've done so far. As long as the kids don't refuse, as long as you're not forcing it, I would continue. Just keep at it slowly over months, years perhaps. He or she, your child may revert and start speaking with you. But even if he or she doesn't speak after all this, if you are able to get them to at least understand and become what is called a passive speaker, that's also a big win. Because if later in life they suddenly turn around and decide that, wow, they want to learn these languages, they are already able to understand it, they will be able to learn it much quicker than starting from a zero base. So alrighty, if you want to see other videos where I talk about different concepts and strategies in raising our multilingual children, please check out the playlist down in that corner. And if you want to see some clips of my kids speaking different languages, please check out the playlist right below this window. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.